FutureSense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nyck Jeanes and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, FutureSense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is FutureSense. Yeah, and good morning to you. You're tuned to FutureSense here on Bay FM 99.9. Thanks to Brett for another bongo gum. Back tomorrow morning, as he said, 6 to 9 a.m. here on Bay FM. With myself, Nyck Jeanes, and my co-host, Steve McDonald, back after a week away last week. Good morning, Steve. How you doing?
Good morning, Nick. I'm really well, thanks.
Lovely to see you. Lots of stuff on the show today. What are we going to be talking about today? A few things we're going to touch into.
Overall, the theme of today is the hidden drivers of complex systems. So we're going to look at a couple of different examples of complex systems and then dig deep and get a feel for what's actually driving the dynamics under the surface, things that we can't necessarily see or sense.
Beautiful. You're tuned to FutureSense with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up. Yeah, you're tuned to FutureSense here on Bay FM. And today is the new moon. We might come back to a little bit about the new moon today, and also the beginning today and tomorrow of the year of the pig in Chinese astrology. Also an interesting shift there. And before we begin today, also I just mentioned that you can text in with comments or questions about what we're talking about here on 0437 043734 043734 And also, we are podcasts now, and you can listen to FutureSense wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Overcast, and there are many others too, especially if you happen to be on an Android or Google one. I think there are different ones, so you can tune in there. And we have a website too, which is future. I can't speak today, Steve. Could you?
That would be futuresense.it.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to start today with we've got a lot to seek to cover. We often don't get through everything we try to cover, but we're going to do our best. But we're going to start with in a sense, the foundation, a bit more about the foundation of this show generally, which is to do with the work of Claire W. Graves. And perhaps I'll let you expand and move into what we're going to sort of the part of that work that we're going to look at today.
Yeah, so what we're going to look at is a process of deep analysis, which is really what this show is all about. It's looking at global dynamics and local dynamics and their connections, and a deep analysis of the drivers, and of course making sense of it all, which in turn can help us make sense of what's coming in the future.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about something called the 6 deep strata concept, which has come out of the work of spiral dynamics author Don Beck and a colleague of his and mine called Christopher Cook, who's a wonderful expert on this topic. Christopher's based in the UK at the moment. And Christopher came up together with Don Beck with something called the 5 deep strata concept, which looks at layers of drivers and also evidence of particular behaviours and dynamics particularly within human consciousness as a complex system and human values. And then I extended that to a 6th level and called it the 6 deep strata concept. So it's in a way, it's kind of like looking at an iceberg, where when you see an iceberg, you see what sits above the surface, and that's clearly visible and describable, but then most of the iceberg is actually underneath the surface. Yeah. And that's stuff that you don't see. And in the same way, when we encounter human values, we come across people's behaviour, and we can watch their actions, we can listen to what they say and get direct clues about their values from those things. But most of the driving dynamics sit underneath the surface and aren't easily detected. And those things that sit underneath the surface at a shallow level are things that people are conscious of. So the people who are doing the behaving and the speaking, they're conscious of things like their own thoughts and feelings and mindsets and
belief systems and the like,
those sorts of things. And so in the 6 deep strata concept, the first layer is these surface level behaviors and actions, and these are influenced by, underneath the surface now, systems, structures and artifacts. And this applies not just to human values, but to all complex systems, this particular layering I'm describing now. And those systems and structures and artifacts are designed by mindsets at a level below. And the
so when you say mindsets here, is that to do with belief systems, for example?
So mindsets are what people would be able to describe for you. Okay.
Right.
Whereas the deeper layers that we're going to get to in a minute, if you ask somebody about them, they would talk about their mindset rather than those deeper layers because they're not aware of those.
Yes.
So the mindsets are at the third level here, and they're derived from, in the subconscious zone now, deep values, what are described as subconscious intelligences, which are adaptive intelligences, and these equate to the layers that we talk about in Claire Graves' work, which show up in distinct sets. And then those subconscious intelligences are adapting to something deeper, which are our internal and external life conditions. So our internal life conditions are everything that we source internally, like our psychology, our history and how that impacts our behaviour and those sorts of things. And then our external life conditions can be physical things and our encounters with our people, and basically together internal and external life conditions describes everything that we sense and are influenced by, so it's quite all-encompassing. And then the sixth layer here is what I've called the evolutionary impulse. So that is wherever all this stuff comes from. If you're a Taoist, then you might call it the Tao, the way. It's the way things are. And if you're, a conventional religious person, you might call it God. But whatever it is, there's something there which gives us a direction and creates our life conditions, both internally and externally.
I never actually thought about the notion of some, for example, as you said, conventional religions being an evolutionary impulse, an idea deep in the consciousness that actually drives the purpose of life in a sense.
Yeah, well, the religions themselves aren't.
Right.
But the religions talk about this omnipresent source.
Yeah.
Which some of them call God, some of them call other things. Yeah, so it's not the actual religions, but it's what they're pointing to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So at that deepest level, I guess there is the potential for us to tune in some ways to that, although we can't necessarily experience it directly, at least not all the time. We can certainly pick up cues in our conscious world, which can be signposts pointing to what this evolutionary impulse is bringing. Yeah. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some examples, and we're going to use the political world at the moment as an example of how surface level behaviours and actions can sometimes suggest that a particular value set is at play. But if we dig deeper and we look at the mindsets and we go below that and we analyse, by looking at the mindsets, analyse which subconscious intelligences are at play, in other words, which adaptive systems are showing up here, or which layers in Claire Graves' terms, then sometimes we can detect a mismatch where perhaps there's an attempt to hide someone's real values and obscure their actual drivers, for what they're trying to do or trying to achieve.
Oh, great. We're moving to politics, obviously, right now.
Yeah, exactly. And then later on in the show, we'll also have a look at climate science, and we'll dig down deep there and look at some of the deep drivers which are not easily apparent to us.
We'll also look at a little bit of the thing called surveillance capitalism, which I guess is another expression of this very thing.
It is in the commercial world. Absolutely, yeah. And in both politics and the commercial world, we'll be specifically zooming in on layer 5 in Claire Graves' work, which is the modern scientific industrial mindset. Still
the dominant paradigm, but moving out.
Exactly, and which has peaked and is now in decline, and consequently is seen by many people as doing damage. And it's becoming more and more apparent that it needs to shift, which is one of the evolutionary drivers of change at the moment.
Yeah. Now, as you said, some of the basic stuff that's going on in the world at the moment, we've seen today, for example, the release of the Banking Royal Commission report from Kevin Hayne, The government has had it since Friday, but hasn't. Obviously, they've been scrambling on the weekend to figure out a way to respond to it. So there's that piece there. And not unrelated is a number of stories about political donations and missing money in political donations, and the large amount of money, for example, donated by the gaming industry, the poker machine industry in Tasmania, as revealed by Andrew Wilkie, the independent MP down there. So those couple of points there, those 3 points there all sort of point to this, or good examples of this on a very sort of day-to-day political, social basis.
They are good examples, and this stuff is showing up at the moment, as being significant and creating a lot of tension for a lot of people, because human values are shifting right now. And in very general terms, we're shifting from these old scientific industrial values towards the sixth layer in Clare Graves' system, which is a very humanistic, network-centric, relativistic set of values, which is characterised by transparency and the strong desire for transparency. And we want to know, and we want to be able to see what people's values are, what's driving their behaviour. We want people to wear their heart on their sleeve, so we can see. And of course, when we look at the scientific industrial values at layer 5, they are characterised by, I often use the analogy of a poker game, where you dealt a set of cards. No one gets to see what your cards are. You hold them close to your chest, and it's that secrecy, that hiding of the information, which actually empowers you as a player, and it actually makes the game. In fact, if everybody just put their cards down on the table and it was all transparent, there would be no poker game, so you couldn't play poker like that at all. So in order to play poker, which is very much representative of these layer 5 values, you've got to hide your own information, and then that gives you the opportunity to bluff people and suggest that you might have better cards than you actually have, which can increase your chances of success in the game. And so life, work, personal success is very much like that poker game. And we're seeing a lot of pushback now because human values are shifting. We don't like that secrecy anymore. And what's really driving that at one of these deep stratas is the increasing complexity of life conditions, which is right down at the 5th layer there. And that's not something that people are generally conscious of or talk about, but it has the impact of making our life more challenging, and it means that we have to move to more complex value sets which are more capable
of dealing with that,
and allow us to cope better in complex environments.
It's very much a point in society, my observation at the moment, exactly what you're saying, that the complexity of outer life conditions is one thing. There's not much security, not much safety, not much certainty out there, generally speaking. But internally, I think the reaction response to that is a very complex inner experience that people are now having, trying to make sense of the world for themselves internally and their experience on all levels, and trying to do that from previous places of intelligence and layers of consciousness is not working. So sort of a tension exists there, doesn't it? A tension increases there.
That's right, and it's pushing many people, and in fact the entire world, into this change process, whereby we wake up one morning and we just feel like things don't work as well as they used to. We don't quite know why that is. At the time, we're just feeling uncomfortable, and if you really understand the change process, then you would realize that that is the first very early sign of the need to change. Okay? Most people don't understand that, and so their first tendency is to look back to a time when things were better, and then to make this regressive search and bring up old values. And we're hearing that a lot at the moment, with people saying we need to get back to old values, we need to make wherever great again, this kind of language. And all of these are indicators of a change process. And then over time, by latching onto the old values, we actually make things worse. We go very quickly into a chaotic state, just like any complex system goes into a chaotic state when it's going through a phase shift, transformational change. And it's that chaotic state which deconstructs our old values and makes space for the reconstruction of our values into a more complex system, a more complex pattern.
And of course, clearly, this is not a linear process, and this is one of the main points that I think is not understood enough yet by enough people. We still seem to think in a very causative way, we do this, and down the track this happens, and it will continue to be that way. But this is not how it is, and I think that's an aspect of human consciousness that now is evolving in many people, seeing that, it's actually much more complex than that, and it's quite hard to take hold hold of in the beginning.
It certainly is, and it requires development to higher and more complex ways of making sense in these higher layers in Clare Graves' system for us to be able to really embrace that chaotic kind of nature of complex systems. And to be really honest, that doesn't come until the big shift in consciousness between layer 6 and layer 7. It's only really when you get into the second tier at layer 7 that people have the capacity to really get the nature of chaotic systems. So and at the moment, there are a few pathfinders around who've kind of busted into that second tier of consciousness and authored material that's been spread widely. One of them, of course, is Edward Lorenz, who was a mathematician and meteorologist, and who is famous for coming up with what's known as the butterfly effect.
Butterfly effect.
And he was
wings
really
here and a storm on the other side of the.
That's right. So he was
planet.
really, one of the fathers of chaos, what we know as chaos theory. Yet these things, because of their complexity, are still not really adopted by the mainstream and still not really understood by most people.
And he based that theory essentially on weather patterns, didn't he? Because that was the most complex system, I guess, that he could observe and find and make some theory from, and it makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, and he was no average climate scientist. He was a qualified meteorologist, but he was a mathematician, which is the key thing. So he was able to do some pretty sophisticated maths to produce that butterfly pattern in his graph, which is where the name came from.
Yeah. Very interesting.
For all of you out there, strangers in a strange land, you're grokking FutureSense here on Bay FM.
9:36 here on FutureSense with Steve McDonald and myself, Nyck Jeanes, and we're talking about the 6 deep strata concept as part of Clare W. Graves' work as applied to the evolution of, everything really, and some of the indicators and signposts around that. And you mentioned the word transparency before as we move to layer 6, that one of the important things for those people in that layer of consciousness or moving towards that is transparency. And we're seeing a huge amount of things being revealed on the planet, the hidden agendas, and yet we haven't seen it all yet. And clearly the Royal Commission into Banking report coming out today is one of those things where some degree of transparency has been discovered, but only so much, because the Morrison government certainly made it the parameters of that commission rather narrow overall. Morrison's already talked about sort of not overreacting to it. All those seem to be symptoms of this notion of let's keep the agenda, the true agendas, hidden somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't want to show their cards. And of course, Morrison was one of the major obstacles towards actually getting the commission. He was very vocal in opposition of the commission, Banking Royal Commission going ahead.
Yes.
And now that it has gone ahead, he's already downplaying the outcomes by saying we shouldn't overreact and we shouldn't act too quickly and all this kind of stuff, even before the actual recommendations have come out this afternoon.
They must have had a hard weekend this weekend trying to figure out how to respond to it. I imagine all the coalition front bench sort of hunkered down some with a few beers or whatever and a bit of the cricket on and talking about how they're going to not respond to the Royal Commission.
Yeah, I'm sure. And one of the interesting aspects of how this plays out in politics is that lobbyist organisations can make financial donations to political parties and then do deals, of course, with the politicians for them to push certain agendas. And what you don't want as a poker player is you don't want people to see what cards you've got, right? So you don't want to say, well, we've had this donation from the alcohol lobby, for example, and as a result, we're shaping our policy this way. That's the last thing that you want to reveal, because that would then collapse the game. It's just like showing you your cards in a poker game. And so what the kind of behaviour that we see from politicians when they are bound by these hidden agreements is we see them pushing a particular policy, a particular line on an issue, and they seem not to budge regardless of what evidence is presented or who they talk to. And so that can make them look quite stupid. And of course, it's true that we do have some politicians who aren't particularly intelligent. However, when you see a politician who is repeatedly just sprouting the same line over and over again, regardless of what they're told or shown in terms of evidence, then it's generally a good indicator that there is a hidden agenda at play. There's some hidden driver. There's been a deal done in the background, and there's some undue influence, most likely.
Yes.
So I urge listeners to look for that in public life these days. Look for people who fail to adapt regardless of the evidence they're shown or what happens.
Yeah, that's interesting.
They keep just sprouting the same line over and over again. It also can be an example of layer 4 values, which tend to be very rigid. Okay, there are a couple of potential explanations here. Sometimes people will latch onto a truth at layer 4 values. Usually they will do that, and then that can be very difficult to budge because there's like a fundamentalist belief system there, and so they'll hang on to that for dear life, because to let go of it means actually changing their values, which is generally a very difficult thing and something that most people don't want to do consciously. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is that people have become closed to external information. So despite the fact that you talk to them, you logic with them, you present evidence, that's not actually absorbed internally, and consequently they have this broken record of just saying the same thing over and over again. And the other possibility is, as we're suggesting, is that there is a hidden agenda. So from layer 5 values, there's been a deal done. There is a motivator that's offering personal success to the politician that's powerful enough for them to keep just touting the same line, saying the same thing over and over again, absolutely regardless of what they're presented with in terms of logical arguments or scientific evidence.
We are seeing some things revealed. I mentioned already in Tasmania the $400,000 poker machine industry donation to the Liberal Party during the 2017-18 financial year. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about that. And you also mentioned the example of the alcohol industry. And both of those decisions that are made via policy from the governments that are supported by those donors to one degree or another, seen or unseen. And the things we don't know, many of them, we mentioned the $56 million, but we don't know where that came from to the major parties. But there's real lives going on here, real lives at risk here from alcohol, which is clearly the most dangerous drug on the planet, one. And from the poker industry, for example, in Tasmania, it's Andrew Wilkie, the independent down there, quotes, accepting poker machine industry donations is all the more immoral when you consider that so much of this money is harvested from gambling addicts. Indeed, the research shows that 40% of poker machine revenue comes from gambling addicts, and that the Liberal Party are aware of that. I mean, this is almost criminal, really.
Absolutely. And
did I say almost? I'll take the word almost out of there. This is criminal.
For listeners who haven't been following the Australian news, recently it was revealed, a list was revealed of sources of donations to political parties, which has been published in the local media, and most of the donation money cannot be attributed. So there's $56 million worth of political donations that cannot be attributed to anybody, because there's a lower limit whereby if you donate below that limit, you don't have to reveal your donation source. And of course, there's nothing stopping organisations
doing it 20 or 30 times.
Exactly, doing multiple donations there. There are also intermediate organisations which are being used. So a donor will put money into an intermediate organisation which will then donate. And obscuring the source, of course. And there are other ways of gathering money, like organising events and selling tickets, for example, and those sorts of things. So $56 million is an awful lot of money, and if you add up all of the donations that have been disclosed, it doesn't add up to $56 million. It's much, much less than that. So the majority of money that's going to political parties in Australia is basically coming from hidden sources. One of the headlines in the ABC News this week was, "What is the government trying to hide?" Okay, and of course the answer is it's trying to hide its cards. It's playing a poker game, and if it lays its cards down, the whole game collapses. So that's the last thing that it wants to do, operating from these layer 5 values.
It's so curious in a way to me anyway that if in an ideal world politicians from all sides of the spectrum came out and actually claimed this and said, yes, we have this. To me, they think, I imagine, it's political suicide. I would suggest actually that level of honesty now might go down very well with a very large percentage of the world's population, in the first world anyway, and because we all suffer from this same kind of disease, really.
Interesting words.
Yes.
So one of the key issues.
You analysing me again?
Always, Nick.
I know.
I can't help it.
It's very uncomfortable at times, but other times I really like it.
We've got to remember that people act from these deep subconscious intelligences, which Claire Graves described in his layers of consciousness. Okay, deep human values. So people, they are not conscious of what's driving their behaviour. And usually they won't change, or they can't change those deep drivers just as a result of a logical argument. So in many cases, it doesn't matter what information is presented. Like, for example, your statement just then of, it would be better if, right? They might be more successful if, but people continue to operate out of their deep values, and it's only a deep transformational change process that will shift those values. And so for that to happen, there has to be considerable evolutionary tension in a person's life, and they've got to go through that whole change process, which takes time. So what we're seeing here is our politicians are showing their cards whether they like it or not, if you know what to look for. Right?
Yeah, I have great hope for people like Tony Abbott when he's perhaps loses his seat in Parliament, that perhaps this will be an evolutionary driver that he can't resist finally.
Yeah,
I don't know about that.
Tony hasn't graduated at poker yet. He's still playing marbles.
That's not very nice, but true. Okay. Yeah.
So hidden agendas, and as I was saying before, the one of the key things to look for is a politician who won't budge on their opinion, and they start to seem stupid because they're just repeating the same stuff over and over again. And of course, in some cases, maybe it is because they just don't have the acumen to pick up on the arguments that are being put forward. But I would suggest in many cases it's because they have a hidden agenda that they don't want to reveal, because really, poker is the name of the game, and they have to keep those cards close to their chest.
Well, poker's the name. The winning is the name of the game. That's the
personal success is what it comes down to. And this is layer 5 is an individually oriented value system. So it's all about my success, and that is a kind of isolating individual theme which runs all through that particular value system. And we're moving from there to a communal value system in layer 6. And all of the tension that we're currently seeing in public discourse, much of it is being driven by the fact that people's values are shifting. They're moving out of that individually oriented theme of layer 5 and into the communal theme of layer 6, which is demanding a different world. Yeah. And some of the things that they used to do before they started the transition are now quite offensive, and they want to try and stamp them out. And, and this is coming out in all of these inquiries, the revelations that we're seeing. And interestingly, very appropriate for the kind of long-term Pluto astrological.
That's what they say, Pluto and Capricorn, exactly. Yeah, very true. Yeah. And as you're speaking, I'm also thinking about the current serious controversy around the Murray-Darling Basin. And clearly hidden agendas going on there, some of which are revealed and some of which are still obfuscated, I would suggest. But also here in what you're saying, that need of the communities down the river, the various communities, both in small towns, agricultural, environmental and the like, who are trying to find a way to come together. Yes. But at the same time, what they're governed by is by a secretive process overall that has occurred that is clearly screwed over the river and a number of those who depend on it.
And once again, layer 5 dynamics. So for those of you listening who are not familiar with the river issue, right up the headwaters of this river, which is up in southeast Queensland, I think you've got Cubby Station, which is a large cotton growing station.
Cotton,
which stores
one of the most chemically administered intensive crops in the world.
Exactly, and so they're capturing a large amount of water in dams there to feed their crops, and of course that water isn't flowing down the river. And this is a very, very long river which flows from southeast Queensland all the way down to the southern oceans.
So it's the largest irrigation property in the southern hemisphere.
Yeah, there you go. And so no doubt there is a financial imperative there, which is pressuring politicians. And that particular issue is constantly pushed aside in the discussion. Of course, people all the way down the river are trying to farm. They need water to do that. There just isn't enough water coming down the river. And recently there have been some major fish kills where thousands of fish have been floating dead to the surface because of blue-green algal bloom in the river as a consequence of the lack of water flow.
Yeah. I'm just reading here that the Cubby Station was created by amalgamating 12 floodplain properties to give Cubby a total of 51 water licenses.
There you go.
That's very powerful stuff there.
You're resonating right now on FutureSense with Steve McDonald and Nyck Jeanes.
thanks for the text coming in. I just remind you can text in at 0437 341 119 or say it like that so I don't get into trouble. 0437 341 119. And yes, we were going to bring up the fact that Cubby Station, which we just mentioned before, at the head, so to speak, of the Murray-Darling system, has 51 water licenses and is owned, in fact, by a Chinese company. It's actually a Chinese and Japanese company. It's a mixture of those two. And it's called the Rui Scientific and Technological Group Company Limited, a clothing and textile company, Chinese and Japanese investors, and that's 80%, and then an Australian company owns 20%. They're a wool trading and agricultural property management company.
Let's be clear that we're not making any accusations here, and we certainly don't pretend to know what the deep drivers are of this particular issue. However, understanding this 6 deep strata concept and the fact that there is a layer 5 mindset at play in government suggests that there will be hidden agendas. It's without a doubt, really. And most likely, as with all complex issues, it's not just one cause, but it will be an array of issues in combination which are causing the problem, and that is most likely in a degree of incompetence, a degree of lack of communication, but also most likely some kind of hidden agenda which is influencing the government's focus and course of action.
I forgot to mention, actually, folks, that if you are interested in going to see King Lear next Saturday this coming Saturday, the 9th of Feb at 1 p.m. at the Byron Theatre, give us a call as a subscriber, 66807 999, and Linda and Helen are out there waiting for your call, because it'll stop them talking and eating donuts and doing their makeup and stuff out there. They're going to get serious.
I thought I could smell donuts.
Oh, I know, that's not too... Don't get me started on donuts. It's a weakness of mine occasionally. Talking about hidden agendas, we're going to look at a couple of other issues here relevant to what we've been talking about regarding the 6 deep strata concept.
So let's give another couple of examples of this layer 5 modern scientific industrial mindset, its deep driving values, and how it's very much like a poker game where you want to be successful, you don't want to show your cards, and so that restriction of information provides power and a likely success for you. Another example that's been in the news here lately in Australia is the issue of pill testing.
Yeah.
And an awful lot of medical bodies here, including the Royal Australian College of Physicians, the Australian Medical Association, and many, many others have come out publicly and said we really need to investigate and trial pill testing in order to reduce harm at music festivals.
Yep.
As an example, the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has repeatedly pushed back on the idea and is simply repeating over and over again this request for people not to take drugs. And this is a classic example of one of at least 2 possibilities. One is that she really is so closed and of a rigid fundamentalist mindset that she's not open to any new information. Or it could be an indicator that she has a hidden agenda. And of course, there are many organisations out there. We don't know the facts, so we're not making any accusations, of course. But one possibility is that someone like the alcohol lobby, who stands to lose an awful lot of market share if other drugs become more socially acceptable. And the alcohol lobby, we know, in different forms and through different organisations, is a regular donor to politics, to political parties here in Australia. And it's possible that there is some financial influence like that impacting her decision-making process and the decision-making process of other premiers. I think there's also strong pushback in Victoria as well. Yeah. And so when we hear these repeated statements over and over again, despite all of the evidence and despite really solid scientific evidence and the urging of professional organisations who really know what they're talking about, we ought to start to consider those options. Okay, well, maybe this is not just apparent stupidity. Maybe actually there's a hidden agenda here. That's one example. Another great example.
Just before we move on to the next example, I just wanted to point people to the article that you sent me from the conversation from a few days ago by Nicole Lee, which is entitled "History, Not Harm Dictates Why Some Drugs Are Legal and Others Aren't." I think it's a very good article.
It's a great article.
There's a fantastic, simple graph there about the harm to users and harm to others of all the legal and illegal drugs, or most of them. And if you have a look at that, you can see quite clearly. And this is a piece of science, I would hope, I'm sure it is.
It is. This is David Nutt's science.
Oh, it's David Nutt, yes, who is the from the
David Nyck is
Imperial College London.
Professor from Imperial College London, who is has been pioneering psychedelic research in the UK, particularly MDMA research and psilocybin research. And he'll be in Australia very soon, actually, on the 13th of February to launch the new non-profit Mind Medicine Australia. Nikolai will be there.
We'll be down there. But this is an interesting article. We won't go into depth with it, but just to point you to it, because it talks about, as it says, as the title says, that history, not harm, dictates why some drugs are legal and others aren't. In fact, you may know that sometimes around the world, coffee has been illegal and cocaine has been widely available, for example. So it's not really anything to do with the amount of harm. It's to do with, well, what we're saying, with politics and the power of money. And clearly the top, some of the top drugs, the alcohol's up the top, and tobacco not far down there, and some of the other obvious harmful drugs in the top of this graph: heroin, crack cocaine, methamphetamine, cocaine, tobacco. And just until halfway down that cannabis arrives, and way down the bottom, MDMA, with very little harm to others and not that much harm to users overall.
And these statistics from David Nyck's research come from a study he originally did in the UK, and then he did expand it to Europe as well. Here in Australia, the graph would probably look slightly different. For example, I saw some research that came out recently saying that tobacco was overall the biggest killer here in Australia.
Right, there you go. Now, we were talking about other examples, so to just add that in there, but I thought it was useful for our listeners.
That's a great addition. I was just going to talk briefly about US military interventions, and I'm recalling a classic statement by President Obama when he was in power, where he came on TV and spoke about the wars in the Middle East and just said, these are really complex situations and we just don't know how to solve them. And I think this is a great example of a hidden agenda, which is unspoken. And just like the poker game, they're holding their cards close to their chest here, because we do know that the defence industry makes an awful lot of money out of wars. And over recent years, it's become pretty apparent that perpetual war has become a business model for the US. And so they always want to have one or two reasonable sized wars going on in order to feed that beast.
Well, it goes back even to 1960 when outgoing President Eisenhower actually pointed to the military industrial complex as a dangerous
that's right.
Conjunction of forces, and he was right.
He foresaw that and warned against it very clearly.
Yeah.
And of course, that's not the kind of thing that you can just come out and say that, well, we're making a lot of money out of these wars, and so we want to continue, because that would collapse the game, just like laying your cards down in a poker game. And so you've got to bluff, basically.
Well, we see the situation in Venezuela, for example, where the US is actually, Donald Trump has just in the last couple of days not ruled out the possibility of military intervention down there, God forbid.
That's right. And of course, Venezuela, I was reading recently, has the world's largest amount of unexplored oil reserves, which is no coincidence
purely accidental.
Yeah. And of course, the Americans love people who get involved in their politics at home, don't they? So it's a bit of a double standard there, apparently.
Yeah, no, there's a lot going on. The other issue, of course, to me, is the current issue around the nuclear disarmament treaty. I can't remember the name of it now, between the US and Russia, which Trump has just withdrawn from, and now Russia has replied and said we'll also withdraw from it, which apparently, according to some reports, is allowing for the expansion of new technologies, more militarization, and the possibility that Russia could lob some missiles back down in Cuba, for example. This was actually on Radio National this morning. I thought, oh my God, seriously, we're going that way again? Yeah. So how do we look at that from this perspective?
This is an example of these regressive values that crop up during times of change, and so the whole dominant global paradigm is failing at the moment because complexity has reached a point where these old systems that were designed pre-internet simply don't work for us anymore. I'm talking about our large-scale social systems like our political systems, our economic system, etc. And one of the key reasons that the complexity has increased has been because of the technology which was produced during the scientific industrial era, which gives us access to far more information. And I'm talking specifically about the internet and our devices, which allow us to access wherever we are almost to all of that information. And so it's kind of like putting up a whole bunch of mirrors around the walls in a poker game, and all of a sudden you can see everybody's cards. This is what the internet has created for us. It's created visibility of all of these things that were once held very, very close to people's chests, but all of a sudden we can see them all, and we can see them because people inside all of these different organisations which are managing these issues, their values are shifting, and so they're starting to reject these ways of doing things. They're starting to speak out. We have whistleblowers. We have organisations like
You're pointing at me,
yes,
and I don't know what you're trying to say. I'm sorry, didn't pop in it.
Assange's
Assange
organisation.
WikiLeaks,
WikiLeaks, thank you.
I thought you said that. WikiLeaks.
No, I was about to, but I was going to say Wikipedia instead of WikiLeaks. Okay. I meant WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
And so, these organisations are all examples of shifting values, all examples of this desire to want to reveal the hidden information and, play on a level playing field where everybody can see everything, basically.
On the other hand, when you use the analogy there of a room full of mirrors around a poker game, I thought, well, of course, that's right. But then those mirrors are going to reflect the negative, the opposite of, and there's a distortion there. And because I wanted to ask you where fake news fits into this.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, Nick. Yeah. Really good, because the distortion is the rejection factor that comes in the first tier of values, the first 6 layers of values in Claire Graves' model. Every time we move to a new set of values, we inherently reject and see as very negative those values that are reflected back to us from the previous layer. So that's a very apt observation. Thank you.
You're tuned to FutureSense with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up.
10:12 here on FutureSense with Nyck Jeanes and Steve McDonald. And just quickly before we move on, just run this double pass giveaway for a little bit longer, a few more minutes. Give them a call, Linda and Helen out there, if you are a subscriber. It's a double pass to King Lear, and that's the National Theatre of the UK or Britain. Fantastic theatre with Ian McClellan in that role at 1 p.m. on Saturday the 9th. So give them a call right now and get in that draw. There's only a few people in it right now, so you've got a good chance of winning if it interests you. Yeah, Steve, we're going to move towards what? We're going to segue gently and
we are going to segue, and here it is. So all of the stuff we've been talking about so far is an example of a reduction of confidence in government. That's actually a worldwide phenomena, and it's part of this value shift beyond the modern scientific industrial mindset. And the economic forecaster Martin Armstrong, he has developed a very complex set of computer algorithms which combine numerous cycles, and as these cycles are laid on top of each other, you get an overlapping, somewhat chaotic pattern. Which doesn't look like any particular cycle on its own, of course, because of the compounding of the different cyclic influences.
Yeah.
And he marked a turning point in late 2015, which was a downturn in confidence in government, which is going to last for quite a while. And he described the theme as a rebellion against the corruption of government, which speaks very much to what we've been talking about this morning.
And as you said, also Pluto in Capricorn, if you are an astrologer out there, you know that describes the same sort of process over this period of time that we're in now.
That's right. So this is a 309.6 year cycle, what he calls the economic confidence model. And interestingly, his prediction cycles, he noticed after some time, are actually in sync with solar cycles and climate change patterns. And this is very unusual. You wouldn't expect this, of course. But when you think about it, it makes sense that during periods of cold weather, for example, economic activity slows down.
It shrinks, yeah.
Right? Yeah. And just the very recent severe polar vortex influenced cold weather that we've seen in North America obviously stopped people from going shopping for a few days. And it will have a longer-term impact on things like crop production, all sorts of other industrial output, because people are staying home and not being able to work in the extreme weather, and those impacts will accumulate over time and reveal themselves, no doubt. So it kind of makes sense when you think about it that weather patterns do impact economic.
Well, you've got the situation in Townsville right now, of course, which is doing the same thing from a different perspective, with an immense amount of rain, 1 metre of rain in 7 days. That's
right.
Townsville.
Yeah, my old stomping ground. I lived in Townsville for 10 years. Yeah, when I was in the army, and it's a very dry, dusty old place when I initially got up there. But they build a water pipeline from the Burlington Dam across to Townsville, and then all of a sudden they had access to water again. Now they've got a little bit too much access to water. Too much.
Some people have suggested running a pipeline down because it's up. So it just should run down by gravity, shouldn't it, into the Murray-Darling Basin?
I'm sure they can figure something out.
Something simple in all this complexity, please.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? Yeah. In fact, I think Pauline Hanson was recently suggesting a pipeline from the...
I think that's right.
From the Kimberley across, that's a pretty long pipeline.
That's a long pipeline.
But I guess, if we can run pipelines across the ocean and put internet cables through them, then we ought to be able to do that as well.
If we can run pipelines across the country to transport oil, we should be able to do that with water also, but these are different topics.
That's right. Yeah. So, as I was saying, Martin Armstrong's economic prediction cycles are in sync with solar cycles and climate change patterns. So that's our segue into talking about climate science. And since our last show together, I have sat down and watched a presentation by Professor Valentina Sarkova. Mm-hmm. She gave a presentation on her climate and the solar magnetic field hypothesis at the Global Warming Policy Foundation in the UK in October last year. And in it, she revealed some of the findings from her research into solar dynamics. So she's been making an extensive study of the sun and its behaviour, and she's come up with some really complex aspects of the sun's behaviour, which are wonderful, because when we're talking about complex systems, in order to understand their dynamics, you really have to dig deep. It's if anybody gives you a very simple explanation of a complex system's behaviour, it's probably wrong, unless they've dug way, way deep through layers and layers and layers of different dynamics to the very simple drivers, towards the base of the stack. So one of the interesting things that she found was, as our solar system travels through our galaxy, of course, we've got the planets orbiting around the sun, and contrary to what we were, most of our generations anyway, were taught at school that, it's all kind of a static thing and the sun stands still and the planets circle around him.
Yeah, it's amazing that itself, that's also just an example of what thought was about these issues 30, 40, 50 years ago.
That's right.
That simplistic comparative to where it is now.
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is a wonderful example of the progression from scientific industrial values. So if you would go back in history, a few hundred years, there was
Galileo.
A time. Yeah, exactly, Galileo. So there was a time when the church said, because the church was kind of the dominant institution globally.
The Earth is the centre of the universe, basically.
Exactly, and everything rotates around us.
Yeah.
And then, of course, people like Galileo came out and said, well, I've been looking at it through my telescope, and it kind of looks like we're moving around the sun. Orbiting around the sun, and of course, some people were killed for that.
Some people were killed for that.
But that's an example of a values shift, and that particular values shift was from the authoritarian, absolutistic layer 4 values, which are characteristic of structured religions, to the modern scientific industrial values, which gave us a more multiplistic perspective. Right? Yeah. And what we're seeing now is another shift again from the modern scientific to relativistic values at layer 6. And so you would expect with this value shift, we're also going to shift our idea about larger scale systems like our solar system, and that's exactly what's happening. And it's happening through the work of people like Professor Valentina Sarkova. So she has observed the sun's dynamics very, very carefully, and what she's found is that as the sun is flying through our galaxy on its own orbit of galactic center, and the planets are following, and some of you may have seen the wonderful video on YouTube. I was
going to mention that.
Which, with the sun flying along, it actually shows the sun moving in a straight line, which is not exactly correct, but it shows the planets spiraling around.
Absolutely beautiful. I'm sure most of you have seen that out there. It's fantastic.
Which is quite extraordinary.
Absolutely.
And so now what she's found is that the sun itself gets pulled around as the planets are orbiting the sun. The center of gravity of the solar system shifts, right? Because sometimes the planets are all on...
Of course it would. Yeah, one side or the other.
One side or the other side, right? So it actually impacts the flight path of the sun. And so the sun oscillates. It doesn't travel in a straight line. It has its own little spiral that it follows, okay? And she's mapped this This is classic layer 6 science, actually, because she's mapped it as a flat diagram. Okay, she's not shown a dynamic of the sun spiraling. She's shown a flat diagram with a left to right, up and down oscillation. And
but nevertheless, it's much more accurate.
But
than
nevertheless,
previous
it's more
iterations
advanced than
Yes.
the layer 5 science.
Yes.
Okay,
And she has a 93% accuracy in her findings.
it's extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary. So right there, she has revealed that at certain times, because of its own oscillation, the sun is closer to or further away from the Earth. But this is a pattern that is separate from our own orbital pattern. Yeah.
Fascinating.
It's fascinating. So straight away she's added an extra dynamic to be considered that hasn't been considered before. And of course she's an astrophysicist. She's not a climate scientist, and this is not the kind of thing that climate scientists study. So, as we've spoken about previously on the show, the modern scientific industrial era caused us to specialise our knowledge in very narrow silos, where we went quite deep and discovered incredibly deep knowledge about very narrow fields.
It's had solved a lot of problems. It's had a fantastic results from doing that. But at the time is for a much more expansive view of science.
That's right. It's time to connect the dots again and start to connect this deep information across different disciplines, and that's what we're doing on this show.
Yeah, so she's talking in this about the magnetic fields of the sun going out of phase. And can you explain a bit about that in the grand solar minimum? That's what you're getting to. Yeah. Because that's something I didn't really understand before. I still don't really understand it, but there's 4 magnetic fields of the sun. Yeah.
So, and again, this is not something that I'm an expert on. So if anybody is really interested, we'll post a link through our FutureSense Twitter feed today to a presentation, the one that I watched, where Valentina Sarkova is presenting a science. It is a complex lecture. She's a scientist lecturing to scientists, and so I'd urge you just to perhaps skip through and look at some of the PowerPoint slides that she has there, which summarise the information in sort of simple terms, rather than the complex science. So her research has disclosed this oscillation in the sun's path through space, and also dynamics within the sun itself. So polarized circulation patterns in the northern and southern hemisphere of the sun, and there are surface level patterns and deeper patterns which take place beneath the surface of the sun. So you've got a surface level pattern on the northern hemisphere and a surface level pattern on the southern hemisphere. There's 2 dynamics there which are polarized, and then you've got deeper subsurface dynamics in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So there's 4 different cycles.
It's a strata system. There you go.
It is, yeah. It's complex. And those change the behaviour of the sun, right, and impact things like the amount of radiance that is projected towards Earth, and also the strength of the solar wind. And the solar wind blows over the Earth and normally protects us from cosmic radiation by reducing the amount of cosmic ray impact on the planet.
That's changing.
Yes, and so during periods of solar maximum, that protection is quite strong, and during periods of solar minimum, their protection falls away, and we're subject to higher incidence of cosmic ray impact. And that, according to the research of that Danish chap that we discussed on the show previously, has an effect on the amount of cloud cover on the planet. So the more cosmic ray impact there is, the more cloud cover there is, which of course is another cooling mechanism on the planet. So we're talking about multi-layered influences here, which is typical of a complex system. You know, and when people come out and say, well, there's this one thing that's changing our climate and this is what it is, and it's going on a linear trend, then they deny the complexity that is found within systems like our climate system. And it's worth reminding people about chaos theory at this point. And I mentioned Edward Lorenz earlier.
Yes.
So most people would have heard of chaos theory, and particularly the butterfly effect, which is, it comes from this idea that a butterfly flaps its wings in South America and it causes, a climate event somewhere else. But that actually came from a pattern of data that Lorenz plotted, and it showed up looking like a set of butterflies' wings with 2 big strange attractor basins, which are part of complex Chaos
theory.
Yeah. Anyway, what I was going to say was that it's really important to remember that chaos theory came out of climate science, right? And Lorenz was no average climate scientist. He was a mathematician as well as a meteorologist, okay? And so that's why and I would suggest that he also had developed to quite a complex level in his own personal development in terms of his values and his perspective on the world.
And that's really important, just that you're saying there, because it is the level, and this is not a judgment of anybody, of course, but the level, the layer that people are actually doing, no matter how brilliant they are, no matter how well they're educated, or who they're connected to, or who they're researching with, if their layer, their level of consciousness is at X, but what is required is for it to be X plus.
Yes.
They're going to be stultified in their appreciation and their understanding of the data that they've got in front of them and what they're going to look at and what they're going to discard.
That's exactly right. And their level or layer, according to Claire Graves' system, is a direct result of their life conditions, right? And their adaptation to those life conditions. So it goes beyond the personal. It's not a personal thing.
That's right.
It's not a personal commentary.
So so Professor Zarkova, with these models that, as I said earlier, have run at 93% accuracy, they suggest, with all the information you just articulated there, Steve, a super grand solar minimum is on the cards beginning in 2020, which is a date next year, very soon, that we've focused on quite a bit, and running for 350 to 400 years.
Yes.
The full cycle, this is not the minimum itself, but the full cycle of this, running this long. And the last time that this happened, there was a small ice age, and only 2 of the magnetic fields that Steve articulated of the sun at that time went out of phase. But this time, she suggests all 4 magnetic fields are going to be out of phase.
Yeah, so what's known as the Maunder minimum, which was a mini ice age back a couple of hundred years ago, was a result of 2 of these, as you said, 2 of these cycles getting out of phase, and this time we're getting 4 cycles out of phase. So we ought to expect a greater impact this time around, and the grand solar minimum is a well-established milestone in solar activity. It's not just one of her findings.
No.
But she describes that the impact of that grand solar minimum will begin in 2020, which is very close, and it will last at least to 2055. So we're looking at 35 years there of climate patterns which are heavily influenced by the grand solar minimum, which, as I was explaining before, one of the outcomes of that is higher cosmic radiation impact on the planet, which has a connection to cloud cover. And I'm looking at one of her slides from a presentation now. She's saying this is a unique event in solar terrestrial connection, and it has a big impact on the terrestrial temperature, and also, of course, a reduction of magnetic fields surrounding the Earth. And she said that one of the impacts that we can expect is a possible food shortage.
Yeah, shortage of vegetation between 2028 and 2032 in particular, very specific there.
Yeah, that's right. And she said there's an urgent need for intergovernmental efforts to make plans for that, to avoid disasters, food shortages, obviously. And it's interesting also that Martin Armstrong's economic cycles, his computer program, has predicted high food prices beginning in 2024. Which he links to the climate cycles, which are synchronized with his economic cycles as a result of cold weather. And looking at what's just happened recently in the US, this polar vortex impacting down over the United States, you can see quite easily how crops will be damaged and destroyed by the extreme cold weather, which has been in some cases colder than
Antarctica. I know. Also, I said to you earlier off air, Steve, a thing I read this morning too, is that the change, I'm not sure if it's happened yet, but the change from this polar vortex, this extreme cold in the northern hemisphere, into very warm, relatively speaking, very warm spring temperatures is extraordinary in itself. The shift, the change from the freezing cold to
a sudden flip. I looked at the weather forecast just before the show, and they're saying that warm patch is only going to last a couple of days, and they're going back to cold weather again very quickly. But this is the nature of chaotic systems, of complex adaptive systems. When they go through change, the structure of behaviour has to fall apart, so it goes chaotic, and so you get spikes in both heat and cold. as the normal pattern falls apart. The same thing happens to us when we go through transformational change from one value set to the next. And then as we transit through that transition period, we come to a new stability which plays out in different patterns or different values in the human case.
Yeah, very good.
For all of you out there, strangers in a strange land, you're grokking FutureSense here on Bay FM.
Remastered version, of course, of that fantastic song by The Police, Walking on the Moon. It is a new moon today at 15 degrees Aquarius, emphasising the need to consider others as well as tending to our own needs. And just so you know, for those who are interested in astrology, Uranus enters the final degree of Aries on February the 6th. This is quite a strong thing, and Mars conjoins it soon. There's a lot of warlike and unusual things going on out there, both globally and personally, motivated to reinvent ourselves at the moment. I think that's a good phrase at the moment, to reinvent. But we will see. We have a winner for the double pass to King Lear on February the 9th at the theatre downstairs here at 1 o'clock, and the winner is Alice and Mark Smith. Thank you for that. Subscriber number 1216. Thanks to all of our subscribers here on Bay FM. Keeps us afloat really good. We have another text in here. Thank you very much. And says, this sounds terrifying, guys, that we could have a mini ice age twice as cold as the last one by next year? Question mark. We didn't quite say that, but
no, we didn't. So it's
John.
No, we didn't say that at all.
I got to turn you on, Steve.
What we're saying was that we're moving into a period where the grand solar minimum is going to be particularly influential, and that will slowly ramp up over time. So, you could argue, it's always very difficult for scientists or anybody to put a specific time period on these sorts of things, because what level of influence do you judge as the place where it becomes significant? So you could argue, for example, that the polar vortex shifting to influence North America, as we've seen in the last week or two, is a very early sign of this grand solar minimum pattern. But Professor Zarkova has picked 2020 as a time when it will become particularly significant, and then the influence will gradually increase. And I would suggest we'll probably peak at times of solar minimum. So during that period from 2020 through 2055, we've got a solar minimum coming at around 2032, I think it is, roughly. There'll be another one roughly about 11 years after that, and another one roughly about 11 years after that. And they do vary in terms of their timescale slightly from cycle to cycle, so it's difficult to predict or to say exactly what the intervals are, because they can change. So you don't need to kind of rush out and buy a fur coat just now. However,
especially if you're living in Adelaide or Melbourne at the moment.
Yeah, what is terrifying for me is that the predominant discussion globally right now is about global warming, and so many people have adopted that as a kind of fundamentalist outlook that simply can't be budged, because they've latched onto it probably from a layer 4 values perspective, during this time of regressing to layer 4 values during the transition globally. And so if we spend the next 5 years preparing for global warming and then suddenly get tripped up by global cooling, that's a big worry. Yeah. What we really need to do is we need to pay attention to the most complex scientific explanations that we can find about climate patterns right now, and then start to act and prepare for what is most likely coming down the track.
Well, of course, we're not doing much anyway, generally speaking, about global warming or climate change generally on the planet. It's a very slow propensity for politicians and leaders to move towards that direction, even so.
And that could be a good thing at this point. It could be a really good thing that there's been no considerable action on global warming, because some of the things that have been suggested, and in fact there's a study, I think it's if I remember correctly, I think it's at Stanford University in the US, which is about to start, which is to do with geoengineering of climate.
Oh yes.
And they're going to try and create a cooler climate in a particular patch of the USA. I wonder if they're still thinking about starting that study after the recent winter weather they've had over there.
I wanted to, can I interrupt for a second? I wanted to, something I said to you off air, we use the term complex adaptive systems, and I think everybody would understand a complex system these days. It's a complex world. When we're talking about complex adaptive systems, to me the word adaptive is also often the one that sort of is a low volume there. People don't quite understand what that means.
Yeah.
Can you just give a bit of an explanation about what that looks like in terms of weather, climate, for example, or any other situation?
Sure. It's a really good question. Let's talk about human consciousness to start with. So what it means is that, first and foremost, there's an inherent intelligence in the system, okay? And secondly, that the system is connected to and open to influence from its environment. And this is something that we often miss when we study anything, and really that's part of the scientific industrial outlook
isolating,
of this
compartmentalizing
isolationist approach.
Reductionism.
Is we forget that whatever we're studying is actually not something that stands alone. It's connected. Even if you stick it inside a glass bubble in a lab, it's still being observed by
someone's observing it,
and
also
it's still subject to the light and those sorts of things that goes in. So
yes.
So a complex adaptive system is a system that is open to input and influence from its environment and has the capacity to sense and act in relation to that incoming data. Okay, and so an adaptive system will shift its own dynamics in order to compensate for whatever's happening around it, and you see this everywhere in nature. You put something too close to put a plant too close to a
AC/DC song,
something, an AC/DC song, or even that, there are scientific studies and stuff like that. But you put a plant that's used to growing in the shade and the sunshine, and it's going to change. It's not going to continue doing the same thing it's always done, because it's going to try as best it can to adapt, and it may not be able to adapt. Sometimes there's a certain limit on the capacity of things to adapt in terms of time and change that they can make. So that's basically what a complex adaptive system is. It's a system that's complex, which means that it has many different parts, and those parts are both connected and interactive. And the interactive part is the adaptivity. There's information passed between the different parts of the system, and there's an inherent intelligence in the system which allows it to make changes to its own dynamics. And so this is when you transfer that complex adaptive system dynamic to, for example, the climate, it raises some very interesting questions. And it challenges the scientific industrial worldview, because you've shown me a climate scientist that thinks that the Earth, which is the system that has this climate around it, is an intelligent adaptive system. No one that I know of, at least in the mainstream, is doing any science which caters for the possibility that our climate is part of an intelligent system.
And not just an intelligent system within itself, but part of a larger system of the solar system and the sun we've been talking about, and the galaxy itself and the universe. And this is a big takes, but I mean, for me, that shows the kind of growth in the way we are evolving towards our place within a bigger system. And that's how it always is, from the small tribal systems to now we're global, we feel global, we understand global, the information is transferred like this everywhere, lots of issues with that. And now we're looking at sort of our home within a bigger system. Perhaps.
That's right, and the deeper philosophical issues that come with that about, what is consciousness? Where does it come from? What is conscious? Are we humans the only things that are conscious in the universe? And it sort of points towards the idea of panpsychism, which is just that basically everything has a level of consciousness. And of course, it's part of this convergence that we're seeing over the very long term between science and spirituality, which eventually on the other side of the big leap in consciousness will come together, where we'll actually find ways of cross-referencing and converging and joining these spiritual issues with scientific issues and see how it all fits together.
And you may, of course, disagree with this, folks, and we're happy if you do disagree with us, and you can text us in. Although we don't have much time for today's show, 043734 11119.
You're resonating right now on FutureSense with Steve McDonald and Nyck Jeanes.
Last 15 minutes or so of FutureSense for this morning, 10:46 here on BayFM 999. And we're talking about Professor Valentina Sarkova's work, and a little bit more about that, because she's retrofitted her theories way back and found some pretty strong correlations with what she's proposing now.
Just to be really particular about the terminology, it's a hypothesis that she has. So it's a theory is something that has been verified through repeated studies. So if you come up with a hypothesis that's quite valid, then someone else should be able to go away and do the same study and come up with the same results.
Very good.
And then, once it's been verified so many times, then it's accepted as a theory.
Yeah.
But a hypothesis is something new.
Thank you.
And so some of the things that Valentina Zarkova has done is she has retrofitted her theory. Her hypothesis. I've just done it myself. She's retrofitted her hypothesis to historical climate data, and she's looked at climate patterns for 3,000 to 10,000 years prior to now, and she's found that this grand minima dynamic that she has come up with in her hypothesis accurately predicts in retrospect the patterns over that period. Yeah. And she's also looked at the Earth's temperature recovery after the last mini ice age during the Morna minimum, and she's plotted that on a graph. And there's a slide in her presentation. And again, we'll tweet a link to this presentation, and I'll also post it on our Facebook page after the show. Yeah. And she's shown how that projection indicates climate change into the immediate future, and she's compared it to the linear global warming prediction from the IPCC, and it's radically different. So that slide will be there on our Facebook page, and I'll tweet it also. The other really interesting thing about her work is that this discovery of the hemispheric dynamics, so different dynamics in the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere of the sun, which themselves have surface level cycles and deeper cycles, also has implications for our climate behaviour here on Earth. And we already know that if we look back at the last mini ice age, the northern hemisphere was hit much harder than the southern hemisphere. So Europe in particular, had a big freeze. The Thames River froze over for quite some time, and there's a lot of art drawings and paintings showing that skating on the river and those sorts of things. And so when we're talking about the Earth's climate patterns, it doesn't make any sense to say that the whole Earth is going to be warm or cold at the same time. It's never been that way, and it's likely never to be that way. So even during that mini ice age, the Morna minimum, there were still places in the world that got warmer during that period, even though there was this massive freeze going on. So there are different dynamics in the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere. Another thing that we know from history is that after an ice age, and incidentally these ice ages, the huge ice ages are often associated with mass extinctions on the planet. Yes. And there's a pattern that's been found in some studies that suggests that life is regenerated out of the southern hemisphere, which would make sense if during a big cold that the southern hemisphere stays a little bit warmer. There's lots of recent studies that are finding an abundance of life in the Antarctic, and we spoke about 1-2 weeks ago on the show.
Right. Well, actually, the Antarctica apparently generates most new life, and this is actually a fairly new hypothesis or theory that cold actually generates more life than heat. And the conventional wisdom, I think, is that sort of heat, warmer conditions actually generate life, but actually it comes new life, and new emergence comes actually from the colder temperatures. Yeah,
there's more variation or diversity of species in the Antarctic than there is in the tropics. Interestingly, in terms of underwater life. So we need to start thinking in more complex ways, more nuanced ways, get away from this idea that it's going to be all hot or all cold even all over the planet. It's really likely not to be like that. History shows that there are very complex dynamics at play, and the temperature can vary in different ways in different places on the planet.
Yeah, very good. Well, that's about it for the show. We were going to talk about, and I did post it, I think, on Facebook, about a very interesting piece that Steve found that we've been looking at. We'll probably get to it next week. It was only been published a couple of days ago, in fact, yesterday. It's called, it's an analysis of Shoshana Zuboff's book on the age of surveillance capitalism, talking about such things. I love this phrase, Gothic, algorithmic demons. And this book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, is already drawing comparisons to seminal socio-economic investigations like Rachel Carson's Silent Spring and Karl Marx's Capital. Zuboff's book deserves these comparisons and more, so says the writer Sam Biddle. We'll have a look at this next week, and it's basically about social media, essentially, and the how would you put it?
Well, it's very much tied into what we've been talking about today. These hidden agendas,
the hidden agendas,
particularly driven by the Layer 5 modern scientific industrial which is also the corporate perspective, right?
What she says here is you're not technically the product, because some people say with Facebook and other social media, you're the product. But what she says is because you're something even more degrading than a product, you are an input for the real product, which is predictions about your future sold to the highest bidder so that this future can be altered. And that's just one of the very deep sort of ideas here. It's
a really interesting insight, and it's a development on this idea that you are the product, which I first came across about 2 years ago, talking to a friend of mine, Guy Garcia in the US, who works in the marketing world. The idea that you are now the product, having you present on a network or something is really providing something that is of value and for sale on a lot of different platforms. And so a more complex, nuanced investigation there is showing that what the end users, the people that are buying this data about you are really interested in is what you're going to do next. So they want to know that, okay, Nyck Jeanes has been looking at this and this and this on the internet, here's some photos, and he's really likely to go and buy a pair of shoes soon, right?
They got me wrong there. I'm not a big fan of shoes.
He hasn't been wearing shoes for years, but this is a revelation.
Looks like it's a trend. It's a trend. Exactly. And we're going to sort of manufacture his consent, to quote the famous,
exactly,
towards this outcome.
And so what they want to do is they want to be able to trigger that desire in you to create the behaviour and make you go buy a new pair of shoes. And exactly these pair of shoes that we're showing you in your feed right now, because they look so nice, are exactly what you've been looking for, and you really want them. I'm
convinced, clearly.
So there you go.
That's about it. I did want to also mention, you may have seen, folks, on the ABC, a piece called The Changing Sound of the Hottest 100. It refers to Triple J's Hottest 100. I thought it was rather interesting, and you might have a look at The Changing Sound of the Hottest 100, because what it's saying here is since 1993, when the weekend countdown began, nowadays the music is much slower in terms of BPM, beats per minute, and much sadder. So I think this is rather interesting in terms of some changes in Australian popular culture and how we're responding to life through our creativity, in fact, and to the challenges that we've been talking about, in fact.
That's right, and I'd suggest it's part of this regressive search that's going on in this values transition that's playing out globally and here in Australia, whereby we're realising that the way we've been living in the scientific industrial era no longer works, and we are in progress shifting to something new. And as part of that shift to something new, we make a regressive search. We go backwards, we look for old things, go back to old ways just to see if they'll work any better. And in the process, it plays on our emotions, of course.
Yeah. That's it for the show. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next Monday.
It's been wonderful.
9 a.m. FutureSense. And as we said earlier, we have a website. It's just sort of points you to our podcast, essentially, at this point. But you can listen to FutureSense wherever you get your podcasts, as I said earlier, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Overcast, and other places too. And you can tweet us at FutureSense Show. FutureSense Show. I'm having trouble saying that word today. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Next week.
You've been listening to FutureSense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. FutureSense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.